Luigi Mangione, the suspect in the killing of CEO of United Healthcare, Brian Thompson, has been charged with terrorism in addition to multiple counts of murder. Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg said that the justification for murder as an act of terrorism, as he put it, was called for. He says, quote, "This was a frightening, well-planned, targeted murder that was intended to cause shock and attention and intimidation. It occurred in one of the most bustling parts of our city, threatening the safety of local residents and tourists alike, commuters and business people just starting out on their day." Just more specifics on what that terrorism charge looks like and means. In New York, under New York law, terrorism charge can be brought when the alleged crime is intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, influence the policies of a unit of government by intimidation or coercion, and affect the conduct of a unit of government by murder, assassination, or kidnapping. Mangione has also been charged with a few counts of murder. In fact, one count of first-degree murder in the furtherance of terrorism, as we just talked about, 2 counts of second-degree murder, one of which is charged as killing as an act of terrorism, and then multiple counts of criminal possession of a weapon. Again, we know that he 3D printed his gun. And so that is in part of the illegal weapons possessions. If he's convicted on these charges, he faces life without parole. Prosecutors are obviously trying to make an example of Luigi, as the murder was pretty unique in its scope and target, in terms of who was the victim here. Legal experts have differing opinions on what this might mean. Mitchell Epner, who's a former federal prosecutor who now practices privately, told Forbes he thinks the terrorism charge is performative and actually may make it harder to convict Mangione. He says the terrorism claims could be a way to charge the high-profile killing as first-degree murder, which is typically used in New York under very specific circumstances, like for the killings of police officers. Now, I just want to stomp down right there. There's a lot that just came at us. But I did want to talk to you, Sharon, about your thoughts on what I just read. Like the idea that first-degree murder under terrorism, these charges specifically are reserved for maybe someone who kills a police officer. Now, what does that mean? It means a police officer is someone who is, revered, respected, upholds the law in theory, although we see all of the ways that they don't. But let's put that aside, right? They are a custodian of the law. They are a government employee. A private healthcare CEO is ultimately a private citizen. This is not someone who was deputized by the people or elected by a mayor or works on behalf of the public. This is someone who is, again, making hand over fist money by denying people and selling people healthcare on the open market. So it is very interesting that he's receiving these charges of first-degree murder in addition to these charges of terrorism. And I just want to throw back up, please, graphic 2 about what the definition of terrorism is. Intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, influence the policies of a unit of government by intimidation or coercion, and affect the conduct of a unit of government by murder, assassination, or kidnapping. Now, on the first 2 counts, intimidating or coercing a civilian population, I definitely, Sharon, I just want to just quickly, I do think that in part, this is what Luigi Mangione tried to do, is to make a statement that the target of his murder was a statement. However, and here's what I will say, I also think that some of these charges of terrorism could possibly also apply to people like Brian Thompson, whose everyday behavior is intended to coerce a civilian population into giving him more and more money in order to receive life-saving healthcare, and in fact, almost godlike. And if you think about, influencing government, well, we know the private healthcare industry influences government to the tune of, billions of dollars. millions of dollars every single year when it comes to buying politicians to ensure they never pass something like single payer. So I'm not saying the terrorism charges are not appropriate, but I do think that they could be broadened, especially as we are looking at this sort of in a broader moral arc of what is right and wrong in a modern society. But Sharon, I'm curious about your thoughts.
I think it's spot on what you said, and it's supposed to be controversial. People looking at what you just said and listening are supposed to say, oh God, that's just so controversial. How can she compare the victim and the accused perpetrator? We're not supposed to speak truth and transparency. There's not one lie in what you just represented. And I think it's daft. I think it is out of touch to charge this accused killer in this manner because they have deputized him. He's not a police officer. This was a heinous killing. It was gross. It was stalking. It was laying in wait. It was cold-blooded. It was disgusting. He's not a police officer, but they do view him as a member of the elite, and many in government knew and loved Brian Thompson, and we're supposed to ignore what he represented and, in fact, what he indeed, we know, did, as many healthcare CEOs do, as just the course of business. So miss me with all of it. This may actually get him off. And I heard today some of the pundits talking about, and some of the reporting was that the prosecution is worried about this sentiment, this public bubbling up. It's as if, like, what are we, in Putin's Russia? Where, there's a pocket of dissent. They better squash that quickly because it could grow and manifest, and then bam, we're out of power. So they're very worried about the sentiment from reasonable people. What you said is actually reasonable and not inflammatory. It just is what it is.
Yeah, and I think it's really important, and you just put your finger on it in terms of when terrorism charges are applied. It is also to send a message and a lesson to others that they shouldn't do anything like this, of course. But even as we saw and we discussed on Indisputable, the arrest of a woman who threatened a United Healthcare worker over the phone and finds herself, under $100,000 bond, right? She was later released, thankfully, without charges. But like, these kinds of things are meant to be chilling. The added terrorism charge is meant to say that, again, it's like if you sympathize with this, then you effectively sympathize with terrorists. If you, aren't incensed at the killing of a CEO, then you might be a terrorist. It is much, much bigger than just this one individual act. And actually, the New York City Police Commissioner, Jessica Tisch, kind of echoed this very sentiment. She says, let me state this plainly, there's no heroism in what Mangione did. This was a senseless act of violence. It was cold and calculated crime that stole a life and put New Yorkers at risk. We don't celebrate murders and we don't lionize the killing of anyone. Any attempt to rationalize this is vile, reckless, and offensive to our deeply held principles of justice. And I think a lot of us are questioning the deeply held principles that undergird corporate America. I think a lot of us are saying, well, what are the principles upon which you deny healthcare to people, refuse to cover them for, life-saving treatment when they are already members, clients, pay you, and they've paid you thousands and thousands of dollars of their hard-earned money? Like, doesn't that actually go against some of our principles? And it's terrible that it takes a killing to reawaken pretty much the very first issue on the top line of most Americans, which is healthcare. How am I going to survive X, Y, or Z diagnosis, or my family member or whatnot? Like, and so, but just because that it took this heinous murder to do that doesn't mean that the issue is not actually justified to talk about without lionizing this person. So yeah, I think it is, we will see how it progresses. It is interesting that maybe legally he doesn't have as much of a, like, it might be easier to get him off because terrorism is so profound of a charge.
Thanks for watching our video. Did you know that you can support our show by becoming a subscriber? Just click the subscribe button and also ring the bell so that you get notifications when we're live or when we post new content.